This is AuthorTalk, brought to you by AuthorHouse, the leading provider of services to help authors publish, promote, and sell their books. AuthorTalk is produced by TogiNet Radio, on the web at toginet.com.
The title of the book, The Catfish Hunters, Technique, Science, and Personal Bests. And the authors are Jake Bussolini and Mac Byram. And Jake joins us now on AuthorTalk. Hello, Jake.
Good morning, Steve.
Well, this is going to be an interesting view of catfish fishing because it often is neglected, as you point out, and it's a real professional sport, not just a hobby for old men, as you put it.
Right.
But I want to read just a little bit about what you say about your book. You say this: "This book brings catfishing into modern times by discussing in detail the best procedures and techniques to use for the best fishing results, along with detailed explanations of the whys that drive my recommendation. Adding the experiences of other experts around the country broadens the depth of the material in the book to show alternative techniques that have been developed. This book is a text on catfishing, not a story about catfishing, and is written for fishermen by fishermen." And you've been fishing, well, as some people would say, a long, long time.
That's right. Long time. Since I was 6 years old.
6 years old, and you're in the bright young age of what, 75 now?
76 last month.
76. Well, I'd say you know a bit about fishing. Why tackle catfishing when, there's so much written out there about fishing? Why would you focus in on catfishing?
Well, Steve, I've written, this is my fourth book on freshwater fishing, and I've covered the subject fairly well. I fished in New England when I was a child. I fished in other parts of the country. When I came to North Carolina, I found it to be different, and that's when I started writing, because in a lot of places like Charlotte, nobody was born here. They all came here from somewhere else. So they came here with an understanding of how they fished in Illinois or how they fished in Ohio, and this was a little bit different down here. So that's how I started. I found that there was something missing in the documentation out there on how you fish in different areas, and so the first three books concentrated generally on what's in the water, what's above the water, how the fish behave, etc. And I always use my technical background to try to explain what the science is behind it. Most fishermen and hunters, matter of fact, most outdoor sportsmen, develop their techniques either from their father or their grandfather up through the years. They've got these certain concepts that they use that they always believed were true. Well, I found as I studied the subject of fishing more, that a lot of this stuff was not true. There was, when you looked at the science behind it, some of the, what I call myths of fishing, were not true. So I started writing to try to correct some of those things. Now, catfishing, I started hearing people say, I want to catch big fish. I want to catch big fish. I'm going down to the ocean and I'm going to catch big fish. And I said, wait a minute, you don't have to catch big fish in the ocean. There's plenty of big fish in the freshwater. And they said, where? I said, catfish. You can get 30, 40, 50, 80, 100-pound catfish. And I teamed up with Mac Byram, who is a professional catfisherman, and he taught me a lot of little tricks that I didn't know. We did a lot of fishing together, and we said, we got something to offer here. People are looking at this sport as you said, an old man sport. But all these folks that live in freshwater areas, they want to catch big fish, and we ought to let them know that you can have an awful lot of fun catching big fish by catching catfish. And, of course, we want to teach them how to do it right. You used the word text in describing what I wrote. Perhaps the thing that's different about my books, they're textbooks. They're books you can go in and read Chapter 7 without reading Chapter 5 if you want to learn something about, how you set up your boat, how do you set up your rigs, how do you fish from shore, things of that nature. So we decided to do this one as a textbook. And decided on catfishing because, number one, east of the Rocky Mountains, catfishing is literally in every state. Generally practiced by old-timers, and, of course, most of the old-timers have their own ways. They think they know all there is to know about catfishing. And we said, no, we think in different parts of the country there's different techniques, there's different methodology that we ought to be able to put out there in a textbook that'll let people, even people that are experienced catfishing, grow in the sport. And that's how we got into catfishing from all these other types of fish.
Well, as you pointed out, you try to set the record straight on some of the myths. And when you think about catfishing, you always think, well, that's a nighttime sport.
Right. And that's absolutely not true. As a matter of fact, there was only, we fished in like 7 or 8 different states and maybe 10 or 15 different waters. And there was only one area over in Virginia in certain months of the year, in the summer, where they actually fish for catfish at night. In all other areas, most people fish for catfish during the daytime. In addition, the public, so to speak, thinks of catfish kind of as scavengers. You know, they crawl around the bottom of the lake eating all the mud and bugs and things, and that's not true. They're not they're bottom feeders to some extent, but they're not a dirty fish. They're not eating garbage. As a matter of fact, in this part of the country and maybe in elsewhere, catfish are a delicacy. You can buy it in a restaurant. We catch catfish to eat. They're safe to eat. They're clean, and so there's a lot of myths associated with fishing that I thought it was important to correct. Time of the day, as you mentioned, being one. Vast majority of catfishing is done during the daylight hours.
You're a pilot, have your own plane, and you flew around the country and checked different places out.
That's right. That's right.
So you bring a real national kind of look to this.
That's right. Catfishing, up until, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there wasn't really any catfishing west of the Rocky Mountains. In recent years, as it's got more popular, they've started stocking them out as far as California and Oregon. But we felt that we wanted to give an East Coast, if I can define east of the Rockies as East Coast, we wanted to give that kind of a view because, first of all, it was fairly easy for me to get there with my airplane. I can go 600, 700, 800 miles without any problem. So we started in Virginia in the James River, which has probably got some of the biggest catfish in the country. We did some day trips and night trips there. We fished there several times. We did a number of North and South Carolina lakes, Tennessee, Kentucky. We went down to southern Georgia looking to gather data on flathead catfish. And we ended the journey in North Dakota in the Red River of the North that has a reputation for the biggest channel catfish in the country. So we covered a very broad range, and we fished with a lot of different people, and we investigated their techniques and got some of their secrets, and we put them all in this book for other people to learn.
Now you give some insight in using technology for catching catfish. What are these technological helps?
Well, one of in terms of equipment, just about any fisherman that fishes from a boat nowadays has what we used to call fish finders. We now call them sonar. Same technique that was used in submarines during the Second World War that we've all seen in the movies. Most experienced fishermen have sonar on their boats, and I have become somewhat of an expert on image interpretation on a sonar. The sonars look down under the water and they give a signal that, if you study it enough, tells you what kind of fish you're looking at, perhaps how big they are. It doesn't give you the exact species, but I've developed a big library of information on it, and I've become somewhat of an expert on interpreting your sonar to tell you what kind of fish they are. And of course, if you know that the fish is 2 feet from the bottom, you got to go down there and fish for them, and that's what this equipment tells you. If you know they're little fish, then you probably want to go to smaller bait. It tells you when you have these images, if you understand how to use them, it tells you a lot about how to go fish for those things that you're looking at down there. So the sonar is probably the big technological improvement that fishermen have. Surprisingly or strangely enough, the rods and the reels, something as simple as that. majority of the fishermen who don't fish for catfish use a certain kind of rod and reel that's quite different than the ones you use for catfishing. Why? It's very simple, because you may be fishing for a 4 or 5 pound bass. In the sport of catfishing, you're fishing for a 50 and 60 pound fish, so you need a bigger reel, a stronger reel, you need a heavier line, you need different terminal tackle, and the market has, the manufacturers have pretty well worked with the market to develop a lot of this new equipment to satisfy the needs. So there's just basic equipment changes in technology, sonar being the biggest one.
And from your point of view, you need a basket full of garlic.
Well, that's one of the secrets.
That's one of the secrets.
That's one of the secrets in this book, which is quite controversial, as a matter of fact.
Well,
Mac Byram taught me this. If you take some chicken and you cut it up in chunks and you soak it in garlic powder overnight with a little bit of salt, and you hook that on your hook, the catfish just love it. And people laugh at that. But we've gone out and fished, tested it, fished with it on and without it, and it works. I mean, the catfish love chicken soaked in garlic.
And they're also, it sounds like cold weather is just as good as a time as warm weather to go fishing for catfish.
Yes, it is. Certainly in warm water, you will get more catfish. There's no question about that. The fish respond to the water temperature. All fish do. The metabolism in their body slows down with cold water. But they always have to eat, and that's the main issue on fish for survival is their ability to eat. And catfish, more than others, because they're bigger, they got to eat more. So even though they may slow down when the water gets perhaps, let's say, below 50 degrees, sometimes it helps because the small bait fish will die in cold water, and the catfish just thrive on these schools of bait fish that are dying because of the cold water. So sometimes the catfish will come up and just gorge on some of these dying bait fish in cold water. And typically catfishing was looked at as a warm water sport. Well, we showed that you can fish catfish all year long. As a matter of fact, we didn't try it, but in some places they fish catfish through the ice.
Well, we all know when you grab a catfish, you have to be very, very careful.
That's right. That's right.
It isn't like probably any other fish, boy. You can get nailed, can't you? You call it a catfish thing.
One of the few stories we have in the book about a situation I had here where I got stuck. We call it stuck, not stung, because they don't sting.
Right.
And they don't do this purposely, but at the very tip of the catfish's pectoral fin, that's the sharp fin that sticks out just behind their gill plate, there's a sort of venom in there. It really turns out to be a combination of 5 different proteins, but it's a venom. And if you allow that catfish to wiggle his way and stick you in the hand with that, it is a very, very painful situation. And I had that situation happen. I passed out. They had to rush me to a doctor.
Oh, my goodness.
And, of course, none of the doctors knew what to do about it because they hadn't heard about this. So all they knew is when you get your last tetanus shot. But particularly in the smaller catfish, I would say of the 2 or 3 pound range where, they're going to wiggle and squirm a lot when you got them in your hands, it's very, very important to watch out where that pectoral fin goes, because if it sticks you, and it'll usually be around your hand, your fingers, your thumb. In my case, it went right through a vein into the bone and really caused the problem. The pain is unbelievable. Now, it will not kill you, but it'll hurt, and I can attest to that.
Well, your book is filled with all kinds of good technology. It's kind of a scientific approach. You help people not only with your view of bait preparation, equipment, fishing techniques, boat setup. You go into checklists and maps and rigging and jigging. It looks like it has it all. Is there something just to end our conversation on? You'd like to share something that would just kind of wrap it up?
Well, I think I've read a lot of the material that's out there on catfishing, and I've seen the books, and they're all quite good. But I think this book tells the complete story. We have gotten tremendous feedback from catfishermen all over the country that have bought this book. Our sales during the first 2 or 3 weeks were unbelievable, and because the National Catfish Association posted it on their website. And we've gotten some tremendous feedback from people who bought it that were long-term catfishermen saying, this is the best book I ever read, because it's got all that material in it. It's got things in it that in some cases people said they did by instinct, and now they understand why they did it. Or they said, we were doing it and we were doing it wrong, and we changed. Instead of going from we went from big bait to small bait, etc. So we've gotten some tremendous feedback on it, and I think this is probably one of the only books that takes the technique of fishing. We throw in some actual little samples and people's pictures that have caught, their personal best 40, 50, 60-pound fish. There's a complete story. Perhaps the only thing that we didn't address in this book is ice fishing and fly fishing, and catfish very rarely get caught on flies. So we think we've covered the entire subject, and we think we've covered it quite thoroughly.
The title of the book, The Catfish Hunters, Technique, Science, and Personal Bests. And the authors are Jake Bussolini and Mac Byram. Jake, tell us how to get your book.
Well, you can get it on the Author House website, or you can go to my website, which is www.jakestakeonfishing.com, and that will link you directly into the Author House store, and you can purchase it on there. That website also contains a blog of mine that always has almost daily updates on different techniques. So it's www.jakestakeonfishing.com, and or go to the Author House store.
Well, thank you, Jake. Thanks for being with us on Author Talk.
Glad to do it, Steve.